I think that's essentially the strategy, to have them being under the heat and then have to negotiate down the tariffs. The question is how far down they can go. But Europe certainly has an opportunity with reciprocity to get free trade if they want to.
Well, today we've been talking a lot about so-called Liberation Day coming up on April the 2nd, when Donald Trump is set to impose widespread tariffs on all countries which he deems to have a trade deficit with the US. That could include the United Kingdom. I'm talking about the US having a deficit with them, of course. You may be wondering what the domestic public in the US thinks all about it. Well, it seems to be fairly popular. Let's speak to someone who knows the president's views on economic policy very well. Tomass Phillipson was the chair of Donald Trump's Council of Economic Advisors from 2019 to 2020, serving in the council from 2017 to 2021. Hello to you.
Good to be with you.
Now, as you know, most conventional economists say tariffs are bad news for everyone all round. They're inefficient and they lead to price rises. Donald Trump says he loves them. Why?
Well, here's I think the real issue that's going on. There's a rebalance going on. So if you look at tariff and non-tariff policy around the world, U.S. treats foreign companies a lot better than foreign countries treat U.S. companies. So the whole impetus for what's going on to start with is that there's an unfair relationship between us being treated poorly abroad and we treating foreign companies better when they come to U.S. That's the underlying source of sort of changing trade policy. So if Europe doesn't like tariffs, they should definitely take advantage of the reciprocity that is coming up on Wednesday, if that becomes an opportunity, because that includes free trade. I doubt Europe will go down to zero, but if they are against all these tariffs, then they should lower their own as well. So that, I think, is the real issue. There's a lot of uncertainty created by this transition. Obviously, when you have a transition, the market doesn't know where you will end up. Will it actually be successful or will it not be successful? That's still an open question. But that's how you've seen the capital markets taking a big hit once this transition was sort of initiated. But the real issue, I think, is tariff policy abroad that needs to become much more friendly towards the U.S. And this is an attempt to do that on Wednesday in terms of the reciprocity.
But the United States has still managed to be the richest country in the world. It has benefited with its own trading in exporting around the world. And it's not true, is it, that the tariffs against the US are wildly imbalanced compared to what Donald Trump is proposing to now levy on the rest of the world?
Correct. I mean, these are high, especially the car tariffs that came out last week. We documented, so the council I was the chair of, we have what's called an annual economic report, essentially, the economic report of the president, it's called. And that documented the imbalance essentially 3 years in a row, which I think we talked about that in that report, sort of what is the data on the imbalance. And this was a issue back in the first term as well. I think it's important to separate a little bit the tariff rationales across countries. So if you take China, you know, think of you as a consumer. You have a trade deficit with your grocery store. You only buy from that store. You don't sell to that store. But if your grocery store took your money when you were buying from them and started to hire a hitman to go after you, you'd be pretty concerned from buying from that grocery store. That's a simple version of the Chinese issue of funding an adversary, essentially, with a trade deficit.
Yeah, but Europeans are allies.
I understand. I'm coming to the Europeans. Hold on. So I'm walking through the different countries. Mexico, the issue is obviously combined with a trade war, or with a drug war. 90% of fentanyl and opioids come through the southern border into the U.S. The president has gotten a lot of concessions from the threat of tariffs with Mexico. So it's been productive. Those concessions on the cartels, etc., would not have occurred without that threat of the tariffs. So in that sense, the Mexican situation has been productive in trying to combat the inflow of drugs. Canada is not going as well, I think. It's much more of a trade war going on with Canada. There's other reasons of illegal immigration from Canada as well, and also their high tariffs on us. They have a huge tariff, I think it's 250% or whatever it is, on certain goods. So there's a rebalance that is attempted there. So many times the people screaming at the president have higher tariffs initially than the president is trying to impose. Let's get to Europe. Europe has, a major issue for the U.S. cars was that Germany had 4 times higher tariffs on our cars than we had on European cars. That has obviously been changed the last week, essentially. And I think that's a different type. It's a little bit harder to understand last week relative to reciprocity, in my view, because last week it was also he claimed in the Oval that was going to be a permanent tariff, so it's not going to be necessarily negotiated down. It's not clear exactly how that tariff relates to the announcement on Wednesday, April 2nd, of the reciprocity. The reciprocity is going to come out, but the reciprocity will raise tariffs initially, I think, when U.S. go up. But then the question becomes, how much downward negotiation will there be from other countries under the heat of being tariffed with higher tariffs April 2nd, essentially? I think that's essentially the strategy, to have them being under the heat and then have to negotiate down the tariffs. The question is how far down they can go. But Europe certainly has an opportunity with reciprocity to get free trade if they want to.
Okay, well, that's a very, very optimistic note on which to end. Thank you very much indeed, Tomass Phillipson.
Okay, thank you.
The US Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to Greenland was a lot shorter than planned. He spent the bulk of his time at the US space base of Pitifukik, located in the northwest of the territory, and he didn't do a lot else. The initial wider trip was curtailed after the governments of Denmark and Greenland raised concerns about an uninvited and unscheduled trip by J.D. Vance and his wife. I spoke earlier to Carla Sands, who was the US ambassador to Denmark during the previous Trump administration, asking her first what the US government wants from Greenland.
Well, it's not really what they want, it's what's necessary. So if we just look at the sort of geopolitics of this, if people could just kind of zoom out a little bit, we see the Kingdom of Denmark. It's Denmark, the small country over in Northern Europe, and then the Faroe Islands, a tiny chain of islands up in that GI-UK gap, not that far from Scotland, from the Scottish Isles. And then we see Greenland, part of North America, the world's largest island. So Denmark has its own capabilities, but as a matter of fact, they're limited just because of the size of Denmark's population and their GDP.
So the idea is to what, annex it, make it part of the United States?
Well, is that a possibility? Yes, anything is possible. But what might make more sense is, in order to secure Greenland, since Denmark can't afford to do and hasn't shown an interest in developing Greenland, it's just kind of left it up there and not invested a tiny bit. But the people of Greenland, they want to be prosperous like every other country's people. And so the play would be, how do we secure Greenland and help them have economic prosperity? And to have it be done with an ally, although they're trying to turn us into an enemy just by the behavior of the Danish government, but as an ally rather than having an adversary come in and do it. Greenland wants to develop. They're going independent. They have no military. They have no capability of defending themselves. So it's really going to be one of the great powers that secures Greenland. Now, should it be the Chinese Communist Party? that has interests that are negative in the world, or the United States, which has good intentions around the world, in spite of what was happening under Biden and Obama with the funding of foreign wars and the things that are being uncovered by Doge at USAID and really throughout the US government. That ends now. President Trump is cleaning house with the help of CEOs and people working with Elon Musk.
Okay, I just want to concentrate on the international policy. The problem with that vision, if you like, is that there are very few people living in Greenland. Those who are there have basically had an election. Some would like independence, but most of them are acceptant, and the new government is acceptant of the status quo, i.e. being with Denmark. So they just don't want this American plan at all. And it looks like, straightforward territorial aggression and expansionism by the US.
Not at all. So if, for instance, the UK had a large island next to it, and
it's called Ireland.
Okay, but Ireland actually, Ireland is prosperous, has a lot of people, and even if it's not a perfect relationship, they're certainly developed and they have, capabilities. Greenland has no capabilities, and Denmark doesn't have. They have like 30 guys up there, Denmark, on an island a third the size of the continental U.S. Even though they're saying we're going to invest, $1 billion over X number of years, that's not going to get it done. And then you have the giant seas, the GIUK gap, these giant seas around Greenland, and I'll say around Faroe Islands, because there's a lot of Russian influence.
So this is basically saying the US takes over whether the Greenlanders like it or not. That's what's good for them. I mean, whether they want it or not, right?
So Greenland was very friendly with the US. Denmark government has, they've done polls out of Denmark. They've done all kinds of lobbying and sort of they've worked to create an enemy, a boogeyman of the U.S. against. So Denmark is trying to play Greenland off of the U.S. to keep Greenland part of Denmark. And I understand the play, and it's to save the government that's there, and no disrespect for that government, but they still can't afford to defend Greenland or develop it. So it's like having an asset, owning a car or a piece of land you can't afford to own. You have to sell it. They can't afford it.
Well, with all due respect, that's not what the Danish government are saying, as you would know because you've been ambassador there. Denmark is actually one of the world's richest countries. I think it's per capita richer than the United States.
No, that's not. So that's not true. And they have an economy about the size of the state of Colorado.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying. That's why I'm saying per capita. And also.
No, they're not. It's not higher GDP per capita.
And this is what's extraordinary. Denmark is a NATO ally of the United States, and so what the administration is saying, you want to take territory away from a NATO ally.
It's not true. So one thing has nothing to do with the other.
I mean, you're ambassador there. Denmark is a NATO ally. Yeah, sure, that's true. Right.
Although they haven't been a good NATO ally, they have failed most of their NATO report cards. They don't deliver what they're supposed to deliver. But as a matter of fact, it's decoupled. It has nothing to do with being a NATO ally. This is an asset they can't afford to own, and they cannot control it because they can't afford to. They don't have the manpower or the money. So because of that, it will be a great power.
Is that what they're saying? They're not saying that at all, are they?
What are they not saying?
Well, they're not saying that they can't afford to look after Greenland.
But they can't. They've never developed. There's not one road between two towns. There was a mayor in a small town that I met and talked to. I saw his plans. He came to my embassy. I went to visit him in his town. He wanted to build a road for three-wheeled vehicles between a town and an airport, a real road. But gravel for three-wheeled vehicles, but it's something. It's a beginning.
Yeah, but look, this is the point.
He couldn't get money. Wait, let me finish. He couldn't get money from Greenland or from Denmark to build his road. So that mayor was a hero.
That was Carla Sands' comments there. She sounds very grasping and materialistic, says Kate. Re-America eyeing Greenland. They're so arrogant talking about this small country and that small country as if other territories don't matter. That's John. Let's now stay with us. Next, we're going to be talking about football. You're with Adam Bolton here on Times Radio.